You know that feeling when you're reading a book and even before you reach the end of the page, there's a subtle sense that something is coming to a close. Nothing in the story announces it outright. There's no dramatic shift in tone, no sudden revelation that forces your attention. Instead, the rhythm begins to change almost imperceptibly. The words seem to land with a different weight, as if they're settling rather than moving forward. The story hasn't stopped, but it's no longer pushing. It's easing itself into a pause. That sensation doesn't come from logic. You don't calculate it or analyze it. You simply know it. And right now, you might be experiencing something very similar, except the book isn't fictional and it isn't something you're holding in your hands. It's your own life. And the chapter that's ending doesn't have a clear title or a visible marker. There's no obvious line separating what was from what's coming next. There's just a quiet internal recognition that something has completed its movement. What makes this moment difficult to name is the absence of anything clearly wrong. Nothing has collapsed. There hasn't been a dramatic interruption that forces you to reassess everything at once. From the outside, your life may look stable, functional, even familiar. You still wake up, still move through your responsibilities, still engage with the world in the ways you always have. And yet, beneath that continuity, there's a difference you can feel, but can't easily explain. It's not urgency, it's not distress, it's not excitement either. It's something quieter and more persistent, like a background shift in tone that doesn't demand attention but refuses to disappear. If someone asked you to describe what's happening, you might struggle, not because it lacks meaning, but because it doesn't fit into the usual narratives we use to describe change. This is often what the end of a chapter feels like from the inside. It doesn't arrive with fireworks or certainty. It doesn't come with a clear sense of what it's leading toward. It's more like watching the seasons change so gradually that you don't realize summer has passed until you notice the air feels different on your skin. You may have started noticing it in small, ordinary moments. Conversations that once felt engaging now seem to pass through you without leaving much of an imprint. The exchange still happens, the words are still spoken, but something in your internal response has shifted. The familiar sense of stimulation or emotional pull isn't there in the same way. Routines that once gave your day structure and momentum now feel strangely neutral. You still follow them, but without the same sense of identification. It's as if you're participating in movements that once fit you perfectly, but now feel slightly misaligned, not enough to cause discomfort, but enough to create a subtle distance. Even the goals you set not long ago sit differently in your awareness. They haven't failed. They haven't been rejected. They simply no longer carry the same gravitational pull. They feel like expressions of who you were when you created them, rather than clear instructions for who you are now. And that realization doesn't arrive as a problem. It arrives as a quiet observation. One of the earliest internal signs of this transition is a change in intensity. Experiences that once felt overwhelming no longer occupy the same internal space they once did. Situations that previously would have dominated your attention now register with less force, as if they're happening slightly further away from the center of your awareness. You still perceive what's happening. You still understand the implications, but the emotional charge surrounding these moments has softened, making them easier to hold without becoming consumed by them. You may notice that your responses are slower, not because you're uncertain, but because the urgency that once propelled immediate reaction has quietly dissolved. There's less pressure to engage instantly, less need to resolve, explain, or defend. This slowing doesn't feel intentional. It feels organic, as though your internal system has recalibrated its priorities without asking for permission. What once demanded immediate attention now waits and often reveals itself to be less consequential than it originally appeared. Arguments, for example, begin to lose their appeal. Not because you've lost clarity or conviction, but because the energy required to sustain them no longer feels proportional to their outcome. The impulse to be understood, to articulate your position perfectly, to ensure that your perspective is acknowledged starts to fade. You're still capable of speaking when something truly matters, but you're no longer compelled to participate in every exchange simply because the opportunity exists. Silence becomes an option rather than a void to be filled. At the same time, the constant mental activity that once occupied every available moment begins to ease. Thoughts still arise, but they no longer demand immediate engagement. They pass through with less resistance, without pulling you into prolonged cycles of interpretation or self-evaluation. The mind, which once treated uncertainty as a problem to be solved as quickly as possible, relaxes its vigilance, not because everything is resolved, but because the need for constant resolution has diminished. This internal quiet doesn't feel dramatic. It doesn't announce itself as a breakthrough. It feels subtle, almost ordinary. And yet, beneath that ordinariness, there's a growing sense of relief, the realization that you no longer need to brace yourself against your own experience in order to move through it. As this internal shift continues, your relationship with identity itself begins to loosen. The narratives you've relied on to explain who you are, what motivates you, and where you're headed don't disappear, but they lose their rigidity. They start to feel like descriptions that were once accurate, useful for a particular phase, but no longer sufficient to encompass your current experience. There's less urgency to define yourself clearly, both internally and externally. You may notice a reduced impulse to explain your choices to others, less interest in translating your internal process into language that can be easily understood or approved. This doesn't come from withdrawal or emotional distance. It comes from a growing trust that alignment doesn't require constant articulation. That being internally coherent matters more than being fully interpreted by those around you. Alongside this, the drive to continuously improve yourself may begin to soften. The constant orientation toward becoming better, more evolved, more resolved, starts to lose intensity. Growth still matters, but it no longer feels like a requirement for worthiness. There's a quiet recognition that much of that striving was sustained by pressure rather than curiosity, by fear of stagnation rather than genuine interest in expansion. As that pressure eases, something simpler takes its place. You become less focused on who you are becoming and more attentive to how you are actually living. Daily experience begins to matter more than future projection. The emphasis shifts from managing your narrative to inhabiting your life as it unfolds. This presence isn't forced. It arises naturally when you stop treating the present moment as a temporary state that must be endured until something better arrives. In this space, comparison loses its grip. Other people's timelines, outcomes, and expressions of certainty feel less relevant. Not because you've resolved all doubt, but because the framework itself no longer feels compelling. Your life doesn't need to resemble anything in particular to feel valid. Internal coherence begins to replace external validation as the primary reference point. Eventually, it becomes clear that what's ending isn't a set of external circumstances, but an internal mode of operation. A version of you that learned how to stay alert, anticipate potential problems, and push through discomfort in order to remain functional has completed its role. That mode served a purpose. It allowed you to navigate complexity, manage uncertainty, and move through periods that demanded constant effort and self-regulation. But survival strategies have a natural lifespan. When they extend beyond the environments that required them, they begin to feel heavy. The vigilance that once kept you safe starts to interfere with your capacity to rest. The constant monitoring that once felt necessary becomes exhausting. The armor you built to protect yourself becomes something you're carrying even when there's no longer a clear threat. The calm you're experiencing now doesn't come from disengagement. It comes from discernment. There's a growing awareness that not everything needs to be optimized, controlled, or anticipated in order to unfold properly. Some things respond better to space than to pressure. Some processes resolve themselves when they're no longer being managed from a place of tension. As control loosens, motivation begins to reorganize itself. You're no longer driven primarily by urgency or fear of falling behind. Instead, you start to notice what draws you forward gently. Interest replaces obligation. Resonance replaces expectation. This shift may feel unfamiliar at first, even disorienting, but over time, it reveals itself as more sustainable. Your future may feel less defined than it once did, but it also feels less constrained. Plans soften into directions. Certainty gives way to openness. You continue to make choices, but with less attachment to how everything must turn out. Trust replaces constant management, creating a steadier, quieter sense of momentum. If this message resonates with you, it's likely because you're already standing in the space between chapters, a place where nothing needs to be announced or concluded with certainty, where the previous phase of your life doesn't require judgment or nostalgia, only acknowledgement. It gave you what you needed to arrive here, even if that wasn't visible while you were still inside it. There's no need to rush toward whatever comes next. You don't need to define it, label it, or prepare for it with elaborate strategies. The page is turning on its own, guided by a rhythm that doesn't require supervision. And there's a quiet readiness in you now that didn't exist before, even if it hasn't yet taken a clear form. Completion doesn't always arrive as clarity or celebration. Sometimes it arrives as space, as relief, as the absence of urgency where urgency once lived. That absence isn't something to correct or fill. It's a signal that something essential has integrated naturally, without force. You may never fully articulate what changed, and you don't need to. Some transitions aren't meant to be summarized or explained. They're meant to be lived. They show themselves in how you move through your days now, in the way tension no longer defines your baseline, in the gentler cadence of your attention. Trust this stillness. Trust the quieter orientation you're inhabiting. You don't need to know what the next chapter holds in order to be exactly where you are. The story is continuing, just without the noise that once surrounded it. And you are, without needing to prove anything, ready to continue with it.